Hello everyone, in this video we will discuss about REST API versus GraphQL. We will see the similarities between REST API and GraphQL and the differences between the REST API and the GraphQL. As we know, REST is an architecture that stands for Representational State Transfer. It is an application programming interface that conforms to the constraint of REST architecture. In REST API, we follow some constraint and that is called as REST architecture. But the GraphQL is a query language that sits between the client and the backend services. So what are the similarities between the REST API and GraphQL? The similarity between REST API and GraphQL is that both GraphQL and REST API sends at HTTP requests and receive at HTTP responses. So now we will discuss about the differences. The structure of the REST API and GraphQL looks something like this. In REST API, if we need all the posts, we send the request to /post and that returns us all the posts that we have. /comments returns us all the comments that we have in database, and /authors returns us all the authors that we have in database. But in GraphQL we have only a single endpoint. We have only a single API, that is /GraphQL. If we need a post, we have to send the post as the name of query. If we need all the comments, if we need all the authors, we just need to pass comments and authors as name of query, and GraphQL handles the rest of the things and return us the result. So if we need all the users in REST API, we send the request to /users and it returns us all the fields of all the users. And if we need a specific user with ID, we need to send a request to /users and /ID. That is the syntax that we are following from several years. If we send the request to /ID and pass the ID to our API, it returns us all the fields of some particular user. Similarly, if we need a book with ID 123, we need to send a request to /books and pass ID as parameter. And the backend service, that is our API, decides what data the API will return. The client has no access to decide which fields of the API or which fields of the object he or she needs. But in GraphQL, we have only a single endpoint, that is our GraphQL, and we pass the data as query string. For example, if we need title and author name of a book, in GraphQL the query looks something like this. We are sending the get request. By default, the request in GraphQL is get request. We need to send the request to /GraphQL, that is our single endpoint, and we need to pass the data as query string. I am naming my query as book and passing the ID 123, and I need to specify what fields I need. Like I want to get the title and author name, so I have to pass the title and author name in it. In GraphQL, we specify the resources we want and the fields we want. So some of the key differences between the GraphQL and the REST API are: in REST API, the API throw all the information to you. Some client may get more data and some client may get less data. And these concepts are called overfetching and underfetching. But in GraphQL, we select only the specific field we need. We do not get underfetching or overfetching of data. So that is the main advantage of GraphQL. Another difference between these two is GraphQL is REST API is not flexible because of users of multiple endpoints to handle data. As you have already seen, we have to write multiple endpoints, /post, /comments, /authors. But in GraphQL, we have to write only single endpoint, and these endpoints handle all the APIs for us. In GraphQL, client can call single API for any type of data. In REST API, client have to work to extract the fields. The API will return all the fields to client, and client have to extract the fields he or she needed. For example, if he needs only the name or only the description, then he have to extract the data from the result that the API throw. But in GraphQL, the clients get only the required field. The REST API is client server driven, but the GraphQL is client driven. REST API has a wide range of options for automated documentation, such as Open API and API Blueprint. But the GraphQL has only a single tool for documentation, that is of GraphQL. If we are using the Express GraphQL, that is the package that we used in Node.js, then we have to pass the GraphQL is equal to true. This will give us a user interface where we do not need to write the queries by ourselves. The GraphQL will write queries for us. Another key difference between these two is our error handling. Error handling in GraphQL is little bit complex because we always get 200 as status code. If the server throw some error, we are still getting 200 status code. But in REST API, we get 200 status code if the client gets some result, and if the backend API throws some error, we get 400 or 500 as status code. Let me show you how this work. This is my login API. If I am passing the correct email and password, it is returning 200 as status code and return ID created at email, first name, and some other fields in my response. But if I pass the invalid email, you can see it is still returning 200 status code. So the error handling in GraphQL is a little bit of complex. So these are some of the differences between GraphQL and REST API. Thank you very much.